Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers force statements, identification laws, and officer ethics, and is brought to us by Janet O'Brien Spradley's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into the interaction, I would like to invite you all to check out the Audit Patreon page, where I will be launching a new podcast series very soon. I will be sitting down to have in-depth conversations with key figures within the auditing and law enforcement communities about the state of policing, free speech, constitutional awareness, and much more. So if that is something you may be interested in, hop on over to patreon.com/audittheaudit or click on the link in the description and join our exclusive community. Now, let's dive right in and audit the interaction. On a September evening in 2017, Texas resident Janet Spradley was on her way home when she spotted a motorist driving erratically somewhere near San Antonio. Mrs. Spradley dialed 911 and began following the driver. Eventually, an officer located the driver, and Mrs. Spradley turned off of the road so that the officers could take over. As she turned around, another officer was approaching, and Mrs. Spradley motioned to the officer, directing him to the erratic driver. Mrs. Spradley continued on her way and pulled over at a nearby gas station. When Mrs. Spradley exited the gas station, she was confronted by Officer Gibson of the San Antonio Police Department.
All I wanted to do was record, all I wanted to do was just to let y'all know that there was somebody driving that was intoxicated. And that's all I wanted to do. I don't want to talk to no cops. I don't want to have my name on any reports or anything.
Officers do not have the authority to force a witness to give a statement, but prosecutors do retain that power once the case has entered the courtroom. Mrs. Spradley had made it abundantly clear that she did not wish to provide a statement to the officer, and this interaction should have ended the moment Mrs. Spradley relayed that to the officer.
Okay. Right here. Let me show you. I'll show you myself. Okay.
Yeah, are you familiar with Terry versus Ohio?
Okay, ma'am. Again, I'm trying to explain it to you right here, okay? So Chapter 38, disrupting governmental operations, okay? Failure to identify. A person commits an offense if he intentionally refuses to
I have not committed an offense.
Listen, I am reading it to you, okay? If he intentionally refuses to give his name, residence of address, or date of birth to a peace officer who has lawfully arrested the person and is requesting the information, or a person commits an offense if he intentionally gives a false, fictitious name, residence. Okay, so right here under 3, the officer requests the information from a person that the peace officer has good cause to believe is a witness to a criminal offense.
Okay, well, I don't know if it was a criminal offense or not.
Okay.
Texas is one of the few states that requires a suspect or citizen to be placed under arrest before they are lawfully obligated to identify themselves to police officers. The statute that Officer Gibson is referring to is Texas Penal Code 38.02, which states exactly what the officer just read. However, Officer Gibson's interpretation of that code is far from accurate. In order for the code to be enforceable to any degree, the person committing the offense must be under arrest. Mrs. Spradley has committed no crimes and is not subject to the enforcement of this code. Furthermore, subsection B3 of the code only applies to arrestees who have intentionally given a false or fictitious name, residence, address, or date of birth to a peace officer. Officer Gibson is attempting to interpret the law as giving him the authority to force witnesses to give a statement to police. But the law is actually designed to hold witnesses accountable for their testimony if they choose to give a statement to the police. Mrs. Spradley did not give any information to Officer Gibson that would apply to the language of Code 38.02, and Mrs. Spradley is not lawfully required to give a statement to Officer Gibson under the authority of Code 38.02 or any other law.
All I saw is that he was weaving.
Okay, well, I do, all right? And you made it clear to me that you witnessed it, all right?
Okay, but I'm not wanting my name on anything. I already told the lady that I talked to at the dispatch that I didn't want to talk to no cops.
Is this your vehicle, ma'am?
It doesn't matter what my vehicle is. I let the lady dispatch know that I don't want to talk to no cops.
Okay, but I came here looking for you because...
Because why?
Because if we're arresting somebody, ma'am, I would like to have as
I don't want to talk to you. I don't have anything to do with anything. I was just being a good citizen and letting y'all know that somebody was driving and weaving.
George Paul Zebra 2945. Can you tell me who the registered owner is?
And, this shouldn't be happening at all.
Listen.
This should not be happening. I had not committed a crime. I have not committed any offense. I have not done anything wrong.
That's what I'm trying to explain to you. I have good reason to believe you're a witness to a criminal offense, and you refuse to identify yourself to me.
I don't know if it was criminal or not.
If Officer Gibson is suggesting that he suspects Mrs. Spradley of committing a crime under Code 38.02, then that would entitle Mrs. Spradley to the right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment, which defeats the officer's goal of this entire interaction. Mrs. Spradley is not legally obligated to speak to Officer Gibson at all, even if she had committed a crime. The Fifth Amendment dictates that citizens may not be forced to incriminate themselves, and if Officer Gibson were to arrest or cite Mrs. Spradley for not providing a statement to officers, then any statement that Mrs. Spradley could provide would become incriminating by its very nature, because it would prove that Mrs. Spradley had violated Officer Gibson's misrepresentation of Code 38.02. Even if Officer Gibson had managed to get Mrs. Spradley to cooperate, it is highly unlikely that her statements would be admissible in court, because Mrs. Spradley would have given those statements under duress.
Not if you think it's
And that is witness. All I'm doing is I saw him weaving. That's it. See if I ever call anything in again.
Yeah, I found her. You just doesn't want to identify herself to me.
I don't want to have anything to do with it.
You didn't expect me to do it.
I don't have to have anything to do with it. Call your supervisor out here, please. I want a supervisor out here.
Give me just a moment, please. He doesn't want to take the call. Listen,
I don't want to talk to
listen
you.
very quick.
I don't have to
Right.
listen to you.
He's home now.
Okay.
So unless we have a witness statement, he's not going to jail.
Although witnesses are vital assets to law enforcement officers, it is not their responsibility to ensure that a thorough investigation is carried out. As mentioned earlier in this episode, most people are under no legal obligation to report a crime, whether they knew about it in advance, witnessed its commission, or found out about it after the fact. However, there are some exceptions worth noting. For example, in California, citizens can be charged with a crime if they aided or abetted in its commission, but did not actually commit the crime themselves. Section 31 of the California Penal Code describes the phrase aiding and abetting as meaning that a citizen assisted another person in committing a crime. Prosecutors can charge an individual as an aider and abetter if they knew about the perpetrator's illegal plan, intentionally encouraged and or facilitated that plan, and aided, promoted, or instigated in the crime's commission. California also has mandatory reporting laws on the books which dictate that certain individuals, such as police officers, teachers, and doctors, are required to report instances where they have a reasonable suspicion that child abuse or neglect has occurred. Many other states have similar laws, but none of them require individuals to report crimes that they had no part in themselves. Mrs. Spradley did her due diligence by reporting the crime to the police and making sure that the officers were able to locate the suspect. Officer Gibson does not have the authority or the ethical superiority to compel Mrs. Spradley to do anything more than what she had already done.
Now we have pretty good reason.
Well,
to
I'm
think,
sorry y'all
listen,
couldn't get there
he
further
was
sooner.
Probably driving around drunk,
Okay.
but it didn't happen in our presence. So.
Well, then I'm
unless-
sorry.
So he gets away with possibly driving while intoxicated.
I'm sorry. I don't want to have anything to do with it. No, I'm not going to be a witness to anything.
Okay.
No. I don't want to have anything to do with it.
All right.
It's not my fault.
All right, Clark, go ahead.
I did what I was supposed to do as a good citizen, and that's it. It's not my fault that he's home already. I told the lady dispatch I do not want to have anything to do with the call. I don't want to talk to you. I don't have to. And you have no right to ask my ID or anything.
Ma'am, I could.
I have not committed a
press this
crime.
further, okay?
I have not committed a crime.
Listen to me.
If you hadn't have found me, what would you didn't? If you hadn't have found me, then what? You wouldn't have a witness anyway.
And that's exactly where we are.
Okay.
You stopped your vehicle. We're pointing me over there.
Okay,
Otherwise, I have
and
no clue what you looked like, what you drove. Nothing.
okay, exactly. So what do you need me now for?
Nothing now. But
Okay,
we don't
thank
have
you.
anything. He's getting cut loose.
Thank you.
Mrs. Spradley was allowed to go free, and Officer Gibson left the scene without further incident. Overall, Officer Gibson gets an F for misrepresenting the language of Code 38.2, attempting to force Mrs. Spradley to give a statement, and focusing his attention on securing an arrest rather than building a legitimate case. Forced statements are not reliable sources of information due to the psychological context in which they are formed. People will say whatever they have to say to secure their safety and freedom. And forcing a citizen to make a statement against their will is a waste of time and valuable resources, and only serves to build a case that will be torn to shreds inside a courtroom. Officer Gibson was so preoccupied with securing the erratic driver's arrest that he did not consider how his actions would reflect in the courtroom. Although the officers were not able to secure an arrest that night, Mrs. Spradley did provide them with vital information that they could use to make contact with the driver and determine the cause of their behaviors. Instead of thanking Mrs. Spradley for what she did do, Officer Gibson chose to threaten her for what she didn't do, effectively severing an increasingly vital relationship between the local police department and a concerned citizen. Mrs. Spradley gets an A for remaining calm, disputing the legitimacy of the officer's claims, and remaining vigilant about her constitutional rights, despite being threatened with arrest or citation. Mrs. Spradley likely walked away from this encounter with nothing more than a distrust of the SAPD. And as she admitted in the video, Officer Gibson's tactics will discourage her from calling 911 in the future. It is extremely important for members of law enforcement to establish trust and a productive repertoire with members of their community, and Officer Gibson's actions produced the opposite effect. Mrs. Spradley's relentless disputes and constitutional awareness served her well during this encounter, and I commend her for her ability to remain calm but tenacious throughout the interaction. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.